The House passes a Democratic budget for fiscal 2008. It's a balanced budget with balanced priorities. We show that we can budget and that step by step we're charting a new course. Hello, I'm John Spratt, and that's my report to the 5th District.
Congressman John Spratt. In touch with South Carolina's 5th District.
The budget I introduced on behalf of the Democratic caucus passed the House on March 29. Our budget reaches balance in 5 years, champions children's health care and education, as well as veterans' health care. It embraces tax relief for middle-income Americans and matches the president on defense spending. I like to say it's a balanced budget with balanced priorities because it reaches balance in the year 2000, but it also protects programs that work and which people depend on. Our budget restores a number of cuts in the president's budget. It adds, for example, $6.6 billion for veterans' health care, $50 billion over 5 years for CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, $7.9 billion over the president's budget for education. Our budget also accommodates tax cuts for middle-income Americans. We uphold the child tax credit, marriage penalty relief, keep the 10% income tax bracket in place, allow for state tax reduction, and call for tax credits for school construction bonds. We also keep the AMT, the alternative minimum tax, from coming down on middle-income taxpayers for whom it was never intended. One overarching feature of our budget is pay-as-you-go. This requires that any entitlement spending increases or tax cuts be offset so that the bottom line, the deficit, isn't worsened. It's a rule that worked in the 1990s. It helped us turn record deficits into record surpluses. And now today, joining us to talk about the budget is my good friend Chet Edwards from Texas. And not only Texas, you come from a district that has a very famous constituent.
President Bush is my constituent. I represent Crawford.
Texas.
We're the poster boy of bipartisanship.
What's your hometown?
Actually, Waco, which is, I call now a suburb of Crawford. But I used to represent for 14 years Fort Hood. So we, like your district, John, we've got a lot of veterans and servicemen and women and retirees who've served their country. So that's been a big priority for me.
I've got a Air Force Base, Shaw Air Force Base, of which I'm immensely proud. But it's about 6,000 or 7,000 acres. When you had Fort Hood, it was 1 million acres, I believe.
It was a big one, and still is. But you know, I share the same attitude you have about our respect for those who've served our country, and that's why I'm thrilled to have the honor on your program to thank you for pushing through a budget this year that funds the largest increase in veterans health care programs in the 77-year history of the VA. And it reflects America's values, that taking care of our veterans is a moral obligation. And I want to personally thank you for that leadership,
Well, let me
John.
tell everybody who you are, because that enhances what you just said. You're the chairman of the committee, the Appropriations Subcommittee, that appropriates the budget for the Veterans Administration, veterans health care in particular, as well as for military construction and other quality of life projects for our military.
That's right.
Name of your subcommittee is?
It's the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Subcommittee. But some people don't follow all the intricacies of the budget process. And the fact is, it is the budget that you passed with your leadership as chairman of the Budget Committee that allows our subcommittee to have the largest increase in the 77-year history of the VA for VA health care. And not only that, it provides enough money to let us hire 900 new VA employees to reduce the backlog of, say, combat wounded cases to determine disability benefits for veterans. A veteran who's just come back from Iraq with war wounds shouldn't have to wait a year and a half to get their disability compensation. So on behalf of all the veterans I represent, thanks for your great leadership.
We've got a chart up here which shows the national debt. We're going to come back to veterans health care because it fits into this chart. The debt when President Bush took office, as this chart shows, was $5.7 trillion. The debt today is $8.8 trillion. That means in 6 years, we've added $3.1 trillion on President Bush's watch, his budgets passed by the Congress in power then. We now have a net deficit, a total debt of $8.8 trillion. And if we continue on this course for the next 2 years, it'll be $9.6 trillion. Over the Bush years, 8 years, nearly $4 trillion will have been added to the national debt. Now, if we can, one final point there, the cost of debt service.
Right.
We incur the debt 1 year, but every year thereafter until the principal is paid, obviously we pay the interest. And what is happening is the debt service is going up and up and up. Fortunately, we've had relatively low interest rates, but we've had a mounting amount of principal to pay interest on. And today, next year, the net interest will be $261 billion. That's $261 billion we don't have for education, veterans health care,
That's right.
highways, transportation, you name it.
That's right.
And we can pull that chart now.
And I know trillions and billions are numbers that hard for us families to relate to, but what it really has meant with the policy that I think's been irresponsible, that you've opposed, is that we have added a tremendous debt burden on the backs of my 9-year-old son, Garrison, and my 11-year-old son, JT. And I was so proud in the 1990s, and you were a leader in this fight, where we worked on a bipartisan basis, but with strong Democratic leadership, to balance the budget. And we actually had surpluses. And I could look at my children when I put them to bed at night and know that I could feel good about the fact the national debt was less that night than the night before.
Now when you put your boys to bed, this is what you have to think about. This chart up here now shows the point I was just trying to make, how much debt service dwarfs other things in the budget, which are big priorities: education, veterans health care, homeland security. All of those are just a fraction of what debt service is. And if we didn't have that debt service to pay, we could have tax cuts and more for all of these priorities as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm glad your 2008 budget has the pay-as-you-go rule in it. The common sense, conservative approach we put in place in the 1990s. It says if we're going to have new entitlement programs or new tax cuts, we're going to pay for them. We're not just going to pass the cost of those programs onto the backs of my children and our grandchildren. And so I think we're getting back on track. I know your budget would put us back into balance in 5 years, and I could be proud once again to look at my children knowing we're not adding to their debt burden.
Let's talk about veterans health care some more. We've got lots of veterans coming home with wounds, more than 25,000 nearly over the 4 years of fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. What's the backlog? What is you mentioned the backlog of claims. What's the backlog of health care? What's happening to these veterans that are coming home and going to veterans health centers and asking for treatment?
You know, I think we've seen some real improvements in our VA healthcare system, and I'm grateful for the dedicated VA employees, the doctors, nurses, and staff. But with over 200,000 veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars coming into the VA healthcare system this year, it's just overwhelming the system, and that's why the increased funding that you put in your budget is going to be tremendously helpful to help us improve traumatic brain injury care for our veterans, to help us improve post-traumatic stress syndrome, to help us reduce the waiting time for doctor's appointments and operations, as well as reduce the time, which is on average about 177-day average wait for a combat wounded veteran to have his or her claim considered through the VA system. So these increases and this historic increase, in fact, in VA health care and benefits programs is going to make a real difference to the men and women who, as you know, with your district, have sacrificed so tremendously in behalf of our country.
They sure have. Do we have a chart on the cost of veterans health care in particular? That's half of the veterans budget. Here it is right here, Chet. The total cost of veterans health care is substantial, there's no question about it. We have plussed it up this year to next year to $43 billion, as opposed to the president's funding, which is about $39 billion. Right. So we're about $3 or $4 billion ahead of the president. But the important thing is, in the out years, we sustain that level of expenditure.
Right.
We recognize that unfortunately many of these cases are going to be cases that have to be treated again and again and again.
You bet.
And we want the veterans health care to be there, amply funded when those veterans show up and ask for the coverage that they were provided. The president's budget does go up this year, and that's good. Mm-hmm. But in the subsequent years, it comes down a bit. So that over that whole period of time, he's really not even keeping up with inflation. We not only increase it for next year, we increase it for all of the out years.